Lord Jesus, thank you so much for your word. Thank you for the book of Esther, where your hiddenness is actually makes your presence more known to me. Father, I thank you for these fellow believers that have come to listen and learn, and that we might be glorifying to you in all that we do this week. In your name we pray. Amen. So this is my husband's family's Torah. I think it was his great-great-grandfather, Steve, I'm not sure. But it is a beautiful book, and it has the Hebrew on one side and then the translation on the other. And so this week, as I studied the book of Esther, I actually did it from the Torah, right? Reading it from here, not the Hebrew. I would need Father Andrew and Leah to come over and walk me through that. But I read the English version, but it was quite interesting to me to remind myself that this really is an ancient book. And it is part of a larger canon of Scripture that we still have today. And so it was really kind of just different. I just wanted to share that with you because I thought it was kind of fun. I always like show and tell at school. So did y'all like show and tell? That's my show and tell for today. So, well, 2 weeks ago, we studied chapter 4 in this class. And let me just do a brief catch-up for those of you who weren't here. We discussed irony. And I told you all as a math major, I still love some irony. And I love the fact that this is a really interesting way for God to continue to show us his moving power. And we discussed how Esther is, maybe it is, God is not mentioned, but his presence is known. And God continues to work out his plans that others think they're in control of. And oftentimes it works oppositely, but it's all to God's glory. And so these are all those just so happen moments. And of all the chapters, today is probably the chapters where this happens so much in our eyes that we can't even look away. So we have King Xerxes, who has a lot of power, but we talked about the fact that he is not a very good king. He is actually very weak. He expects other people to tell him what to do. He doesn't show a lot of wisdom, right? And he is controlled by his own impulses. And he's quick to listen to what others think should be done. And we'll continue to see this today as well. And this comes up again today, so I want to remind you that one of the things I shared with you, learning from my study in the history of this book, is that Persian kings rarely listened to anyone outside of 7 royal family representatives. So they didn't know what was going on in their kingdom from other people's point of view. They only got it from these 7 people. So we also have Mordecai, who is a Jew living in Susa. We think that from all I can tell, he's a godly man. He cares about his niece, which is almost like a daughter to him, Esther. He's raised her as a daughter. And he is faithful, but he's one little thing that he refuses to do. He refuses to bow to Haman, even though that was the king's order. I have to wonder if Haman didn't kind of get that manipulated into his contract as well, but that's another thing. Haman is the king's right-hand man, and even though it is commanded by the king, Haman won't bow. And so we talked a little bit about that. CJ talked about it, and we talked about it again. And we came to the conclusion, at least I kind of have, that Haman is a descendant of Agag, who Saul was supposed to kill, right? And Esther and Mordecai are descendants of Saul. So again, we see this clash of good versus evil, which has been going on since the book of Genesis, and will continue to go through the book of Revelation. And so I think that Mordecai doesn't bow to Haman because he refuses to bow to the evil empire. We don't know that for sure, but that is where I'm going with that. So finally we have Esther. She is a beautiful young Jewish woman. She is caught up not in a beauty pageant that is often conveyed, in my opinion, but in a sex trafficking scheme. And there's nothing new under the sun, because all you have to do is open the paper today and read the continuing saga of the Epstein trials. So who this guy wants to satisfy, the king and his cronies want to satisfy their own ideas of a good time with no thought, and this is one thing we talked about 2 weeks ago, there's no thought to the harm that these women will actually endure. Most of them would have spent the rest of their lives in isolation, not able to marry or have children, but stuck in an individual room in a harem somewhere, basically alone. But Esther, when she is made queen, she does not disclose that she's Jewish. And y'all, every time you study, right, don't you learn something new? Just this week, I found in one of the historical readings that the main queen in Persia had to be Persian. Okay, I somehow had missed that before. So the king could have as many wives as he wanted. Think about Solomon with his 1,000 wives. Oftentimes they were part of an alliance with another kingdom. Sometimes they were just for the king's own personal whims. But the main queen in Persia had to be Persian. That was a law. So I thought that added a little something else to our thought of why Mordecai might have told Esther not to say she was Jewish. It was not for shame for being Jewish, but he knew that if the king knew she was not Persian, he'd have still taken her in the harem, right? But there would have been no chance that she would have had any other elevation. And perhaps Mordecai's using that as an opportunity to protect her and at least give her a shot at being, having some type of station in her life. So then we had a crisis that occurred, that edict that Haman wrote and manipulated the king into signing and actually paid for, which will essentially annihilate all of the Jews in the kingdom. And it's based solely on his hatred of Mordecai and the fact that Mordecai will not bow down to him. And then last time we considered how Mordecai was able to let Esther know about this plot. He couldn't tell her. She was isolated in the harem. But her servants saw that he was in sackcloth, and he got word to Esther, and through a series of conversations in a go-between, he tells her that she has a chance to be a part of the long line of those who have been used by God, that maybe she's there for such a time as this. And we concluded with Esther saying, if I go to perish, I go to perish, but I will go. And she accepts what we talked about being a call narrative. And this is her call from God. Her call is to go before the king and be a part of this line of people that have gone on, that have come before her and will come again, to be part of that big circle of God's redemptive story for all of us. So here we come now into chapter 5. So would someone read for me the first 8 verses of chapter 5? Do I have any volunteers this morning? Or I've voluntold you one way or the other.
On the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, opposite the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne inside the palace, opposite the entrance to the palace. As soon as the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won his favor, and he held out to her the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther approached and touched the top of the scepter. The king said to her, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you, even to the half of my kingdom." Then Esther said, "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to a banquet that I have prepared for the king." Then the king said, "Bring Haman quickly, so that we may do as Esther pleases." So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. While they were drinking wine, the king said to Esther, "What is your petition? It shall be granted you. And what is your request?" even to the half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled. Then Esther said, This is my petition and request. If I have won the king's favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet that I will prepare for them, and then I will do as the king has said.
Thanks. So what has Esther been doing for these 3 days? Fasting and praying. It doesn't say praying, right? But we know that's what happened. That's what part of the Jewish culture was to fast and pray. And I mentioned this last time, but I just want to bring that up again. If any of you have ever planned a banquet, or even just an important dinner, you don't just order it out, right? Even if you cater it, aren't you a part of that process? So for 3 days, Esther has been planning a banquet while fasting. She might not have been actually doing the cooking, but she smelled it. And she knows this king, right? She knows this king. She knows he wants everything. It's got to be good. So she is personally selecting the wines. She is making sure the food is to his liking. She needs to impress him. She needs to get his attention. And so she's doing all this for 3 days. Think about the use of 3 days here, because biblical scholars think that it's really important. Think of other 3 days you've heard of in the Old Testament. 3 days in the belly of the whale. Yeah.
3 days in the tomb?
I'm sorry?
3 days in the tomb?
Yeah, 3 days. Any others? So I didn't know this, but Abraham and Isaac's journey was a 3-day journey to sacrifice. 3 days is used over and over again. And then what's the most important 3 days? The 3 days in the tomb. So all of this is told as a part of a story. 3 days is important to God. One theologian remarked that 3 days was a symbol that perhaps her task would succeed. God is an orderly God, and as a math major, I have to love that. So she's been fasting and praying, and she is getting ready for this feast, and she is actively overseeing this banquet, because this dinner has to be perfect. All right? So what's her attitude as she enters the court? It doesn't really tell us, does it? Perhaps she was scared. But I have to say that I think her whole attitude has changed over these 3 days. Because when she was talking with Mordecai, she was like, I haven't been called to the king's palace in 3 days. in 30 days. And if I go without being called, he'll kill me. Because that's the way it works in this kingdom. But it's time for Queen Esther. She's now Queen Esther. We talked about that a couple weeks ago, that she begins to be called by Queen Esther for the rest of this book. It's now time for her to put her money where her mouth is. So she has to actually go in. So I looked some things up about archaeology and historians and what they said about what this room would look like. It would have been huge. Probably this size, maybe a little bigger, but probably even taller. And the king, there was only one entrance in, and the king would have been seated at the far end away from the entrance, and all the different artist paintings that we have from that time and carving always show a Persian king sitting on a dais with his scepter, and behind him is a soldier with an axe. In every picture. Because if you come into the king's palace and he doesn't want to talk to you, you're out. And here's what I found fascinating. It didn't even have to be the king say, hey, I don't want to talk to CJ, take him out. He could just not acknowledge you. If the king did not acknowledge you, you were dead. So if he had dozed off, you're in trouble. And that's true, the way it worked. So Queen Esther walks in here, And it says that she comes in her royal robes. The Hebrew actually says she comes in wearing a kingdom. That's the literal translation. So she's come in dressed well. She is dressed in a way. So if I had been invited, which I have not been invited to ever visit the king or queen in England, there would be a certain protocol for what you dress and how you look when you come in. Well, King Xerxes likes all the stuff, right? He loves it. So you're not coming in however you want. There's a protocol here. King Xerxes does. What she's using, what she knows will work, right? God has given her beauty. That's not all she is. She is wise, and she has a lot of street smarts. And she is willing to listen to advice. And we saw that back in the first couple of chapters when she is willing to do what her servants tell her the king will like. So she is willing to listen, and she's wise, and she takes advice, and it works because the king holds out his scepter and he says, Queen Esther, you've come to visit me. How wonderful. What do you want? I will grant it to you, even up till half the kingdom. Now, he didn't actually literally mean half the kingdom. This was a saying, just like I might say, I bet you $1 million. Or if I had a dime for every nickel, I bet I'd be a millionaire. These are the kind of sayings. However, he did not have to say this. So it is a symbol of him being generous and receptive to whatever this person has to say. However, I do want to tell you, I'm sorry, I went down a lot of rabbit trails this week in history. And I read some stories that I found. We don't have time for all of them because there are a lot of doozies with King Xerxes. There's more that we can find out about him than you know in the book of Esther. But one story came out that this guy does not have a lot of wisdom because he has said this before. In fact, the reason he said this before was that he had a little side piece, happened to be his brother's wife. And he says to his friend, what you've pleased me, what can I give you? Up to half the kingdom. And she said, I'll take that royal robe that you're wearing that the queen gave you, made by her own hands. Now, we don't think this is Esther. He's had several queens. Vashti may not have been even the first, which is kind of interesting. He's known for getting rid of them. So he tried to talk her into other things. He said, well, how about a city? How about an army? These are things he offered her instead. And she goes, no, I'll take that robe. And his pride won't let him say no. And he gives it to her, and she uses it to cause quite a commotion in the kingdom by wearing it around. So there's just a little something. But there's somebody else that has said something very similar in the New Testament. Does anyone remember? Yes, Herod. So Herod says to Herodotus, after her dancing, we'll call it, pleased him, that what do you want? Give you whatever you want. And with consulting with her mother, what does she ask for? The head of John the Baptist. And what does he do? He does it, but did he have to? Now, have you ever told your children or a student or your sister or even your parents, have you ever said to them, yeah, I'll do whatever you want, and they tell you something and go, oh, no. Didn't know you were going to ask that. That's not happening, okay? And what did my daughter used to say? But you promised. Yeah, well, I made a really bad promise. And I'm sorry, that one's not going to happen. There's a pridefulness here in their word that they're not willing to say no to a request they could have. So, but Esther now is coming before the king, and he makes this request to her, and she's presenting herself to me in a confident way. And it also made me think, how do we approach unjust leadership? And I don't really have an answer for that. I just want you to think about it. There are times when we have to approach an unjust leader. How do we do that? I hope we do it first through prayer and fasting. I hope we do it with street smarts and make sure we have our act together and have our facts correct. But it also kind of came to my mind this week about Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea going to Pilate and asking for the body of Jesus. And I don't know why that came to me, but I thought, here's another example of godly people coming who before were worshiping in secret, most likely, now coming out in the open to ask for something from an unjust ruler that will benefit the kingdom. So just want to tell you that I think sometimes God is using those circumstances in our lives. So why a second banquet? Why does she ask for a second banquet?
She must have been a really good cook.
There you go. Maybe she was a great cook. That would not be in my family. That would be Steve, not me. What else? What do you think?
To make him really indebted to her?
Yeah, really, maybe really curious too. I did read that this is really part of this culture. This street smart she's using here it's not weakness. Some scholars have said over time, oh, she was weak, she backed out, and she just asked him to come to dinner again. But that's not really the way this culture worked. It was a common ploy to sort of work up to what you really wanted. Okay? I want you to think about your children trying to butter you all up for something before they ask you the big ask. Okay? Never any of our kids or nieces, never. But I remember if I got up in the morning and someone had already done all their chores and the room was clean and the kitchen was clean, I was like, what do you want? Okay? I'm sorry, but please don't tell my kids I said that. But there you go. So the other thing is that she's giving him a chance to say yes to an easy yes. This is an easy yes. Hey, do you want to come to a party? This is a king who loves to party. Yes. Now, his original party that we read about was 6 months long. She didn't have time for that. She's dead. So she said, how about a second dinner tomorrow night, right? So he comes, and we're going to get to that, but she invites Haman. And this guy, he wants power and prestige, and he is all about the opportunity to hobnob with the best of them. And this subtlety, she's subtly laying out a trap. And she's providing the type of activity that these two men love best. And it's a preparation for a big finale. Ironically, I just find that Haman and King Xerxes, who have passed this law that women can't tell their husbands anything, and they don't have to do anything. They have to do whatever their husbands say, are really quick to fawn all over Esther to go to this second banquet. So let's move on. And I want to point out the irony, because I love the irony. So the irony here, too, is that he doesn't even realize, Haman does not even realize that he is going to dinner with the very people he hates, a Jewish woman. And not only that she is a relative of the man he hates the most. And so here we go. Verses 9 through 14. Who can read that for me, please? Somebody?
Haman went out that day happy and in good spirits. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate and observed that neither rose nor trembled before him, he was infuriated with Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. Then he sent and called for his friends and his wife Zeresh. And Haman recounted to them the splendor of his riches, the number of his sons, all the promotions with which the king had honored him, and how he had advanced him above the officials
Wow. So Haman has a lot of pride.
Oh yeah, I underlined in here all of the me, I.
Me, I. Yeah, for sure. I agree.
My riches, my friends.
My stuff, it's all me.
I magnify.
Absolutely. You know, the Bible has a lot to say about pride. Proverbs is full, and oftentimes it says that pride is followed by disgrace, punishment, and destruction. And this is what we're going to ironically see again in Haman's life. So here we have Haman privately having dinner with the king and the queen, no greater honor in this land. He has everything he wants except the kingship itself. And a couple of weeks ago, we talked about that. Whatever we worship will destroy us if it is not the worship of God. So would that, I have a question for you. I wonder, do you think if he had been king, would that have been enough? No, because what's his emotional stability here, or instability? What fuels it?
Hatred for Mordecai.
Hatred?
He said, even with all that stuff.
Yeah,
I just
even
need
with
to
all
see
that stuff.
It means nothing.
It means
to Mordecai.
nothing. That's right,
So it
CJ.
would be then the destruction of all the Jews everywhere, not
Yeah.
just in
Persia,
Persia, it would be.
the next step, right? And if he had power in Persian kingdom, this is how dictators become, right? They want that next power. They want that next country. They want to take over. So he cannot enjoy any of his good things that he has in this world, because it's not bad to have a lot of children or to have money or to have, but he can enjoy any of it because he feels threatened and disrespected because of his out of control rage that this one guy won't bow down to him. So that leads us to another question, and we probably don't have time for all this today, but why is Mordecai still not bowing down? CJ and I talked about that why? Would it have changed anything? If Mordecai had thought Haman would rescind the edict, would he have gone and bowed? I don't know. This is really one of those mysteries. I don't know the reason. But I have to say that maybe he just felt like there was no reason to compromise anymore. Or perhaps he really trusted that God was going to solve this problem. And he wasn't going to give Haman the time of day to actually bow down. I don't know. But Kathleen just told us some of the things that Haman takes pride in, all those me, wealth, the number of his sons, position and place in the kingdom, the relationship he has to the king and queen. His only fresh news, if you want to call it that, is, hey, and they've invited me again. I get to go a second time to this banquet. But you know, God does not put stock in any of these things. I was looking at them one by one, talking about, just in this culture, having sons was the thing, and the more sons, the better. But, in Ruth, the book of Ruth, Naomi's friends remarked to her that Ruth is better for her than many sons. God has used lesser sons to advance his kingdom. Think Jacob and Esau. Think other times where the younger is promoted above the elder. It's not about how many children you have. And here's that irony again, that his wealth that he's so proud of, not to step on Blister's toes, he's not here, but I think he teaches next week, but he's going to lose it all to Esther.
Well, even Mom says in verse 13, yet all of this does not satisfy.
Yeah, he admits it. I'm not satisfied. But I think that if he were to get to kill Mordecai, I think there would have been something else, because this is the kind of man he is. So it's another thing to look quickly here how Haman's wife and advisors indulge him. And maybe that's a lesson to us. We ought to pick our friends wisely. Just like King Xerxes in chapter 1, Haman is only surrounding himself with bad company, people pleasers, and yes men. All right? No one in their circle was willing to speak truth to them or question their ideas. So I just want you to think on this. Do you allow people in your life who are willing and unafraid to speak truth to you about your decisions? Something that we need to remember. Haman echoes Xerxes' earlier out-of-control response to Vashti from chapter 1. It's out of control to build this pole 50 cubits high, which most scholars believe would have been about 75 feet. So think about running a football field 75 yards and turning it this way. However, there probably wasn't a pole quite that big, but here's what I found fascinating. He would have put it on the tallest hill with the pole on top, and that would have allowed that 75-foot height. That would have been the tallest point, taller than any building in the city of Susa. So everyone around the city, no matter where they would have been able to look up and see the body of Mordecai impaled on this stake. And I have to think about Jesus. Because what did they do? They took him on a hill and they put him on a cross, and it lifted up for the whole world to see. So we could do 3 whole lessons on the different Christ analogies in this chapter, or in this book. So there is, I don't have time to tell you the really crazy story of how Haman killed his daughter, but there's another out-of-control situation in Haman's life. So one day, catch me up over coffee. I found that fascinating. We'll talk about that. So let's look at this next section. We're going to move on just because we're kind of... Okay, so let's go to part 3, God's providence. Can somebody read Esther 6, 1 through 11 for me? CJ, will you read that for me?
That night the king could not sleep. He gave orders to bring the book of records to Anos, and they were read to the king. It was found written how Mordecai had told about Bigthana and Teresh, 2 of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold and who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. Then the king said, "What honor or distinction has been bestowed on Mordecai for this?" The king's servants who attended him said, "Nothing has been done for him." The king said, "Who's in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to speak to the king about having Mordecai hanged on the gallows that he had prepared for him. So the king's servants told him, "Haman is there, standing in the court." The king said, "Let him come in." So Haman came in, and the king said to him, What shall be done for the man whom the king wishes to honor?" Haman said to himself, "Whom would the king wish to honor more than me?" So Haman said to the king, "For the man whom the king wishes to honor, let royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, and a horse that the king has ridden, with a royal crown on his head. Let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials. Let him robe the man whom the king wishes to honor, and let him conduct the man on horseback through the open square of the city, proclaiming before him, 'Thus shall it be done for the man whom the king wishes to honor.'" Then the king said to Haman, "Quickly, take the robes and the horse, as you have said, and do so to Mordecai, who sits at the king's gate. Leave out nothing that you've mentioned." So Haman took the robes, the horse, and robed Mordecai, led him riding through the open square of the city, proclaiming, "Thus shall it be done for the man whom the king wishes to honor."
Isn't it great? This is like every kid who's ever been bullied ever in their life. This is like their dream scenario. You know, when the bully gets it, I'm just saying. But poor Haman, not really. He's got to feel a little bit like Will E. Coyote that Steve said I mispronounced who he was the other day. But Will E. Coyote that we talked about in the Roadrunner, he's got to be feeling a little bit like this. He has set the perfect trap, man. He's so ready. He is going to go into the king. He's going to get what he wants. And anyway, this trap is going to escape on top of him. Let's look at all the providential things that occur in these verses. These just so happens. All right, what's one?
The dream.
He couldn't sleep. The king couldn't sleep. What else? He wanted to read the records. What a great bedtime story. What else?
Haman happened to be in the court.
Haman happened to be in the court. I'm sorry?
The story that came up.
Yes. The chronicle he actually picked to read was the story about Mordecai. And I want to throw in one more. I think it's providential that Mordecai wasn't honored originally. Because if he had been, as they read this passage, it had gone right over the king's head. He would have never thought twice about it. And Haman would no doubt have walked into that court, asked for Mordecai to be killed. The king would have been manipulated into it like he always does before the banquet and before Esther and Mordecai's plan had had a chance. For a king like Xerxes, or really any Persian king, to discover that you had not given honor to someone who had done something good for you was shameful. It was a big deal. Ancient kings were big believers in honor and rewarding publicly those who showed exceptional service to the king. You could think about if you saved the life of the president or you won an Olympic medal, you would be invited to the White House. Okay, so this is even more so because kings and their clothing were often seen as having divine power. Anything they touched. So to ride a king's horse or to wear his robes were a symbol of having some kind, or his crown, were a symbol of having some kind of power and almost a godness.
Well, the King of England is the head of the church.
Okay, true. I hadn't thought about that at all. I did think, however, about the fact that Jesus came in riding on a donkey. And whose robes were on the donkey's back? The people's. Christ came in not to be some pompous riding through the palace grounds and the countryside or the cities showing how great he was. And then this is what Haman wants. He wants that power. He's always wanted it. He's wanted it from the start. This is his idea. He would have known all these things about tradition, and he wants it all. It's just really interesting. Lots of fun. So he had it in his mind. And remember what his name meant from 2 weeks ago? Does anybody remember? Haman means celebrated one. He wants everybody to celebrate him. Here's another chance. And the king says, do everything you just said. And I bet he's like getting ready to Mordecai. He's like, what? This is terrible. And the king acts quickly, which is his nature. He doesn't make a lot of decisions on his own, and he moves fast, and he tells him to do it, and Mordecai has to do all of this for the very man he hates the most. The trap is being set. The trap is set. Let's look at the last two verses, or last three verses really quickly. I'm going to read them just to do it kind of quickly, but then Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house mourning and with his head covered. The man who thought he was going to be celebrated is now in shame. Who was in shame, in a way, last chapter with his head covered? Mordecai. Mordecai was. And Mordecai was in that square, too. You remember the city square? He was out there being in mourning and sackcloth and ashes, and now he's just been paraded around in the king's horse. Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him, and they said, before Mordecai, his wife Zeresh says, if Mordecai before whom your downfall has begun is of the Jewish people, you will not prevail against him, but surely you will fall before him. And while they were still talking, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman off to the banquet that Esther had prepared. So what does Scripture tell us Mordecai did after this great, powerful, I'm such a great guy event? He went back to work. He went back to work. He probably went back in his regular clothes. Y'all, I have to think too, Mordecai goes back to the gate and Haman has to pass him again. Still not bowing as he's in shame on his way to see his friends. And all of a sudden, all these friends I'm sure he went home thinking he was going to get a lot of, oh, poor thing, this is terrible, and he doesn't. He doesn't get the response he thinks he will. His wife, and you know those wives that weren't supposed to tell their husbands anything? His wife, and she's named. Don't you love it, ladies? There's a lot of times we don't get their names, but we know her. Her name is Zeresh. I wouldn't want that name, but we do know who she is. They're just like, well, you're going to die. They have turned on him so fast, as my grandmother used to say. They know what size their bread is buttered on, and it's not his anymore. You know, who wants to be on the losing side? I don't want to be on. They're changing quick. These cronies who were part of building up this murderous plot against Mordecai, now we're like, oh, we're switching sides. Yes.
That reminds me of Gamaliel. Did he say something similar?
He did. I don't remember. It's one of those.
They were coming up against the disciples, and he called them together and said, "Hey,
Yes.
you found coming against the kingdom."
It'll-
It sounds very familiar.
It does. And we really shouldn't be surprised they've dumped him, quite frankly, because he has surrounded himself with such depravity. And again, it's important that people that we surround ourselves with are truthful and that we can trust and that have our best interests at heart. Not that we don't reach out to others. That's not an excuse to not have friends in other places. But it's just a reminder that those we take our encouragement from, our counsel from, who are they? It's important. You know, God is using all of his creatures and his creation to work his plan together for the unfolding plan of his salvation. But I don't want to end without acknowledging that we can see how this is all going to work together for good to those who love the Lord, right? But in the middle of life, trauma and pain that we find ourselves in, we often don't find the answer. Sometimes never. Sometimes not for many, many years. You know, even Esther, now the queen of Persia, I am sure she grieved. This was not the life she could have chosen. We are never told much else about her. We don't know that she had children. She certainly didn't have that traditional Jewish family marriage that she probably wanted. What happens when we don't get to see the outcome in the midst of our trials is because we're on the wrong side of eternity. And I just want to remind us that it's okay to acknowledge our hurts and our griefs and our sadness and things that don't go the way we wish they would. But it's also important that we trust that in God, he may not take it away right this moment, but in the view from eternity, we're going to be able to look back and see where his hand was with us all along. And that's all I've got to say this week. Any comments? Yeah. Yeah. That's okay.
Did y'all see Gardens and Gospels in the
Yes.
Herald? This is a wonderful day that we did it last month with CJ, where we are in West Montgomery. We go to like 3 or 4 different homes, and we clean up their yards, cut, edge, trash, everything, and we share with the homeowners of their home. And it's a great thing to do as a Christ Church community, and also it's giving back so much that these people are so appreciative. So, skip your second cup of coffee or bring it along with you Saturday morning in the car. And kids like Jason, age 9, was there to bring kids, and they loved helping. And anyway, it was just a couple of hours in that morning. So we'd love for all of you who came to come share. Bring big boys too.
Thank you. Thanks, Adele. Anything else? Well, go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Thanks be to God.